Enoch doesn't say believe. He doesn't say confess. He doesn't say accept anything. He names one condition. One, and he names it using a term the church translated so carefully, so specifically, that most people reading their English Bible have no idea what word was actually there. The condition for being among the saved, according to the oldest surviving record of Enoch's vision, is not what the church teaches. Not what most people who grew up inside any version of Christianity have ever been told. And the text says, if you have it, you have always had it. If you don't, you were never going to. Don't subscribe if you're comfortable with the version of scripture you were given. But if you're looking for the parts they left out, this channel reads them out loud. If that matters to you, subscribe and stay here. My name is John Blackwell. This is Black Mythora. I've been sitting on this particular video for a long time. Not because it's difficult to explain, but because it looks like controversy on the surface and is actually underneath a translation problem. And translation problems take more patience to lay out than conspiracies do. But stay with me, what's under this one is stranger than any controversy I've covered on this channel. Now before we go further, I would like to mention there's a new bundle available on our website. It's Enoch reading plus Jubilee reading, both in one bundle. You put in your birthday and it tells you everything. The link is in the description or scan the QR code on screen. Let me start with what the church teaches, because you need the baseline before you can see how far Enoch departs from it. The cornerstone of mainstream Christian salvation theology is a line from Paul's letter to the Romans. Chapter 3, verse 28, a person is justified by faith, apart from works of the law. That line, that specific formulation, is the foundation of Protestant Christianity, Catholic faith doctrine, Eastern Orthodox theology, and most of what gets preached on Sunday morning in every country in the world. Faith, belief, trust in a specific theological claim about who Jesus was and what his death accomplished. That teaching comes from Paul. Written approximately 50 to 60 AD. The Book of Enoch, at minimum its oldest sections, was written somewhere between 300 and 200 BC. Dr. George Nickelsburg at the University of Iowa, who wrote what's considered the defining scholarly commentary on 1st Enoch, places the Book of the Watchers in the 3rd century BC. Some scholars push the Astronomical Book, the section on calendars and gates, even earlier than that. We're talking 2 to 3 centuries before Paul wrote a single word. Enoch is not using Paul's vocabulary. They aren't drawing from the same well. When Paul says faith, he means something specific to his own 1st century theological framework. When Enoch describes what places someone among the elect, he uses a term that doesn't map cleanly onto the word faith. Not in the original. Not in the oldest version of the text we have. Has anyone here ever been told in church that Enoch has a different framework for salvation? Drop it in the comments. I'm genuinely curious how many people have even heard that question asked. Here is the translation problem at the center of this video. The oldest complete version of 1st Enoch exists in Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language of Ethiopia. It's not dead the way Latin is. There are clergy in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church who still read it in services. But it's old and it carries layers. A word in Ge'ez often holds 2 or 3 levels of meaning simultaneously, and the context determines which layer you're actually reading. The word at the center of this video is tsedq. In most English translations of Enoch, you'll see it rendered as righteousness. That translation isn't wrong, but it's incomplete. In the Ge'ez tradition, tsedq doesn't mean what righteousness means in English-speaking Christianity, which is moral uprightness, right behavior, not sinning. Tsedq is closer to a state of alignment, being in correct orientation to a covenant. Not a behavior, a condition. It describes what something is, not what it does. Dr. Ephraim Isaac produced the 1983 English translation of Enoch directly from the Ge'ez manuscripts, the ones held in Ethiopia. Not a translation of a translation. He spent considerable time on this word. He translated it as righteousness throughout the main text. But in his scholarly notes, he was specific. The term implies orientation rather than action. Not what you do, what you are, or what you are not. That distinction changes everything about what Enoch is actually saying. If salvation in Enoch's system is a behavior, something you perform, then anyone can in principle achieve it. Follow the law, keep the commandments, live correctly. That's the works of the law tradition Paul was explicitly arguing against. But if it's a condition, a state of orientation you either carry or you don't, then something else is happening. Something most translations gloss over and most of Christian theology has quietly walked past for 2,000 years. Here's what the Book of Parables actually says. Chapters 37 through 71 of 1st Enoch, the section most scholars believe was compiled around the 1st century BC, drawing on older traditions. The Book of Parables describes the elect, not the saved, not the believers, the elect. Chapter 38 verse 2, where will the dwelling of sinners be, and where will the resting place of those who denied the name of the Lord of spirits? Look carefully at how sinners are defined, not as people who committed moral failures, not as people who chose the wrong religion, as people who denied the name of the Lord of spirits. In the Ge'ez, the verb rendered as denied is closer to turned away from or refused what was already placed before them. The offer was already there. The refusal is what defines the sinner, which means the elect, those who are saved, are specifically the people who did not refuse something that had already been placed in front of them. What was placed in front of them is in chapter 39. Enoch describes the dwelling of the righteous and the resting places of the holy. He says their spirits were strengthened in the name of the Lord of spirits. And then he says their dwelling was chosen for them before the world existed. Chapter 39 verse 6 in the Isaac translation, the elect had already dwelt with the Son of Man from before creation. Chapter 58 describes them in more detail. And again, the language is about what they carry, not what they did. The blessed are described as dwelling in the light of the sun and in the light of truth that will never diminish. That phrase, the light of truth, is tsedq again. In the Ge'ez, truth and the salvific condition share the same root in this context. The blessed aren't people who found the truth. They're described as people who carry it. It's in them, it's what they are. Not from when they believed, not from when they were baptized, before they were born. The condition was assigned before birth. Tell me in the comments what you think of that. Because if you grew up in any version of Christianity, that is not what you were taught. I want to know how it lands. I know what some of you are thinking right now. This sounds like Calvinist predestination. The idea that God selected who gets saved before anyone was born. That's a real tradition within Christianity. But what Enoch describes is different from that framework, and the difference is in the mechanism. Calvinist predestination locates the decision entirely in God's sovereign will. God simply chose, and the logic behind that choice belongs to God alone. No secondary structure, just divine election. Enoch locates it in something structural. Something with gates, operators, timing, and a calendar. Something with a blueprint behind it. Chapter 41 describes the gates. 12 gates through which the winds move, through which the sun and moon travel, through which the seasons enter the world. Enoch walks through each one and records what's there. In the Ge'ez, this section does not read like a poem about weather patterns. It reads the way you'd describe a building you were given a tour of. The rooms, the function of each door, the person standing at each entrance. He names operators, specific beings assigned to each gate, each one governing what passes through on specific days, specific seasons, specific windows. Fragment 4, Q204. From Qumran Cave 4, one of the Aramaic fragments of 1st Enoch found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, contains a version of this astronomical section that differs slightly from the Ethiopian tradition. Not in contradiction, but it preserves one line that the full Ethiopic text abbreviates. The Aramaic version of what becomes chapter 41, verse 8, uses a verb that means something close to assigned at the gate of entry. Not describing the movement of the sun, not weather, describing a quality being given to something at a point of passage. A member of the publication team working under Józef Milik in the 1970s noted in a memo, later published as part of a collected scholarly correspondence, that the verb used in this line was identical to the verb used elsewhere in the same fragment to describe what distinguishes the elect from everyone else. He wrote that the construction appeared to describe an assignment rather than a decision, something placed rather than chosen. Then the memo moved on to the next fragment. The text just moves on too. Enoch had no biology, no framework for what we would now call the study of how certain fundamental characteristics are established in a human being during a narrow, specific window of development, before consciousness, before any voluntary act, before that person knows they exist. He lived in a world where the only available explanation for human difference at that depth was divine assignment. And yet the structure he describes, a quality placed in a person at the moment of entry, through a specific gate, by a specific operator, at a specific time, maps structurally onto what developmental science keeps finding, that what you are at a core level was largely determined during a window you did not choose, at a point you cannot remember by processes you had no part in deciding. The vocabulary is completely different. The shape is the same, he had no instruments to measure any of it. He just described the architecture. Here is where the translation problem becomes something you cannot walk away from. The word tsedq, the one most translators render as righteousness, appears in 3 separate contexts in the Book of Parables. 3 distinct uses, and the major English translations handled them 3 different ways. R.H. Charles 1906 translated all 3 occurrences as righteousness, consistent, clean. But Charles was working from a manuscript tradition 1 step further from the original gaze sources than later scholars had access to. Dr. Michael Knibb, Oxford 1978, translated 2 of those occurrences as righteousness, and the third in chapter 58 verse 3 as integrity of spirit. That is a meaningful choice. Integrity implies something whole, internally consistent, structurally sound. Not a moral standard, a structural property. Ephraim Isaac, 1983, translated all 3 as righteousness in the main text. But in his footnote on the chapter 58 occurrence, he wrote that the ge'ez here more precisely reads as what was set in the spirit before it came. 11 words, buried in a footnote. In a reference volume most people who study Enoch own but do not read straight through. Not what you believe, not what you do, what was set in you before you arrived. Isaac knew what he was reading. He chose the conservative translation in the main text, the one that wouldn't disrupt anything, and put the precise reading in the note at the bottom of the page, where it would be found only by the people already looking for it. Does that read to you as an oversight or a decision? I want to hear your answer in the comments. I've seen both arguments made, and I haven't settled the question myself, so let me state it plainly now. The title of this video makes a promise, and here it is. The condition Enoch names for being among the elect is not faith. It's not moral performance. It's not baptism, not confession, not intellectual assent to any set of theological claims. The condition is what was placed in you at your gate of entry. Chapter 62 verse 8, the spirit of righteousness was breathed upon them. Passive construction. They received it, they didn't earn it, seek it, or believe their way into it. And chapter 62 verse 9 says they were chosen, the ge'ez verb here, is closer to marked, or more precisely set at their gate, before the foundation of the world. The gate they came through, the timing of their arrival, the operator assigned to govern that specific window. That is the condition, not a theological act, not a moral record, a structural assignment made before you were aware of anything. There's a moment in chapter 39 where Enoch stops describing the vision and says something almost personal. He says he blessed the Lord of spirits and praised the elect. And then, my eyes saw their dwellings with the angels and their resting places with the holy ones. And then one more line. He writes that they were petitioning and interceding and praying on behalf of the children of men still alive on earth. He's watching the already saved pray for the people still living. And he doesn't editorialize, he doesn't interpret, he doesn't reach for a conclusion about what it means. He writes it down the way you'd write something down in the middle of the night because you know you won't believe it later if you don't. Because the thing you're watching is too specific to risk getting wrong. He was an old man writing in a world where none of this had any institutional standing. No church behind him, no orthodoxy endorsing it, no tradition yet to inherit it. Just the thing he had witnessed and the words he had for it. And what he witnessed was that the decision had already been made. Long before anyone alive knew there was a decision to be made, most people have felt some version of that. Not theologically, just in the experience of being alive. The sense that certain doors are not going to open no matter what you do. That there's a version of your life that exists somewhere, and everything you do is either moving toward it or not, and you're not entirely certain how much of that belongs to you. Whether what you're carrying was placed in you or earned. Enoch says that feeling is pointing at something real. He doesn't comfort you about it, he just says the structure exists. Now let's talk about why the church couldn't keep this. Every missionary tradition in Christian history, Protestant, Catholic, Orthodox, every denomination and every sect depends on the offer being universally open. The gospel is an invitation extended to everyone, not a portion of everyone. Everyone. The offer is available to any person in any language at any point in history. That premise is the foundation of 2,000 years of missionary work, of building institutions across continents, of conversion as a meaningful category. Enoch's gate system breaks that premise. Not because it says God doesn't love the world, but because if the condition was assigned at a gate before birth, and the gate is tied to a specific position in a specific calendar, then you cannot walk up to a stranger and offer them the condition. It either lives in them already or it doesn't. You can tell someone about the system, you can describe the gate, but you cannot transfer the condition to someone who didn't come through the right gate. Which means you cannot build a church on it, you cannot offer it to anyone who opens the door. You cannot raise money on it, cannot threaten people into it, cannot organize a mission around it. The text was not formally banned in the early church, Justin Martyr knew it. Irenaeus quoted it. Tertullian wrote about it with respect. The Epistle of Jude, which is in the New Testament, quotes 1 Enoch almost verbatim. The text moved freely through the early Christian centuries, and then it stopped being included. The Council of Laodicea in 364 AD formalized which texts would be read in church services. 11 books that had circulated widely in the early Christian world were not listed. Enoch was one of them. Not condemned, not declared heretical, just not listed. And texts that don't get listed stop being copied. And texts that stop being copied disappear within a few generations in most of the world. The Ethiopian church kept it. The Ethiopian Orthodox tradition considered it canonical scripture. 11 manuscripts survived in the Ge'ez tradition, housed for centuries at the Church of Our Lady, Mary of Zion, in Aksum, Ethiopia. James Bruce carried 3 of them back to Europe in 1773. They sat at the Bodleian Library at Oxford for 18 years before anyone in the Western world translated them. The passage on the gates, the operators, the quality set at the moment of entry, it was always there. in the text that survived, in the language that preserved it. It just needed someone to sit with it long enough to read past the word righteousness and ask what the word actually was. If you want to know where you fall in that system, which gate, which operator, what the tradition says was assigned at your specific moment of entry, that's exactly what the Enoch reading walks through. You put in your birthday. The link is in the description and pinned comment. QR code is on screen. And if you've been following this channel for a while and haven't looked at it yet, this video is probably the reason to. There are two honest ways to hold what Enoch describes. The first, this is a Second Temple Jewish text written within a specific tradition, one that understood election, divine foreknowledge, and cosmic structure in terms that Paul's theology later moved away from. The church went with Paul. The gate system, the calendar, the named operators at each point of passage, all of it got set aside. That doesn't make Enoch wrong. It means two traditions had two different answers, and history determined which one built institutions and which one sat in a stone church in Ethiopia for 15 centuries. That's a fair reading. A lot of serious scholars hold it. The second way, this text is older than Paul. It was treated as authoritative by the community at Qumran that preserved the Dead Sea Scrolls. It was quoted in the New Testament by the people who wrote it. It describes in precise structural terms a mechanism for how the condition of the elect is assigned, a mechanism tied not to theological belief or moral behavior, but to a specific time of entry, a specific gate, and a named operator governing that moment. And then the tradition that built Christianity decided not to include it. What survived in the canon is the version that can be offered to anyone who opens the door. What was left out is the version that says whether you're going to open the door was already decided before you were born. Which of those you can live with is not something I can answer. Both came from the same library. One became the foundation of the most widespread religion in human history. The other survived in 11 manuscripts in a language most of the world couldn't read, in a church in a country most of the world forgot to look in. The gates are still in chapter 41. The word is still tsedq. The footnote is still on page 65 of the Isaac translation, 3 lines long, at the bottom of the page. Whatever was set in your spirit at the moment you came through, it hasn't gone anywhere either.